Well, last year, we saw some big increases in violent crime here in the Valley and across the country. Researchers are just starting to dig into why this all happened. It likely had something to do with the pandemic. We also saw unprecedented social unrest. But our investigative reporter Morgan Loew is here to talk about what he found when he looked into this spike. Morgan, first off, how big of an increase are we talking about here?
Tess, here in Phoenix, Mesa, and Chandler in particular, the rise was substantial. We're talking about increases from 30% to over 140%, and that amounts to dozens of more murders across the valley when compared to the year before.
Those are big numbers when you say it that way, for sure. And we've heard that this, we're in the midst of a pandemic. We know there's been stuff going on, a lot of extra stress. But does anybody know the real reason for the increase?
So the protests we saw last year likely played a role in the increase in, say, aggravated assaults. And the pandemic, unemployment, and people being stuck at home were definitely contributors to an increase in domestic violence. But none of that explains the rise in the number of murders. And according to researchers, that was due to young men killing other young men in economically challenged areas. And we're talking about things like gang violence.
And I've heard of that, the stress of being jobless, of needing money, led to maybe some of these crimes. Despite the one increase, we know it's a one-year increase. It's not necessarily a trend. What are the chances, though, that this was just a bad year, or is it a trend that we are worried about?
Yeah, it could be just a bad year, but the numbers show that murders and aggravated assaults were actually rising before the pandemic struck, and that is something that has researchers worried.
And we can only imagine that is much more difficult to reverse a trend than it is to deal with a one-year spike, if that's what we are seeing.
Yeah, sure. But one of the year-end crime reports I read made a case for taking aggressive measures to restore trust in police, add some tried and true anti-gang programs like increasing drug treatment, homeless assistance, and targeted enforcement. And researchers argue that those steps in particular really could and should make a difference.
And I guess it's getting those programs into place is the big question of how do we do that next, right?
Right. Our leaders, our state and city leaders, need to take some measures to put these into place.
All right, Morgan, thanks for doing that deep dig into these numbers and what could come of it. So we appreciate all your hard work.